Defendant Arguments. Our position is that ABC CPA firm fully complied with auditing standards in its audit of Clovatec Inc.'s 2007 financial statements and internal controls. We argue that ABC CPA firm should not be liable for negligent misrepresentation. To help you understand why the auditor's actions were in fact not negligent, I would like to first give you a short background on what the auditor's responsibilities are in the financial reporting process. Then I will provide specific details about the 2007 audit of Clovatec Inc.'s internal controls to show that the auditor performed well within the duty of care required by the audit standards in the U.S. After you hear these facts, you will no doubt find that ABC CPA firms should be found not liable for negligent misrepresentation. An auditor's job is to reduce the probability that people receive misstated financial statements, but auditors cannot provide 100% assurance that the financial statements are accurate. Auditors could potentially find every misstatement, but to do so, they would have to examine every single transaction in which a company took part. This would make the cost of an audit so high that no one would be able to afford an audit at all. Instead, auditors examine a subset of transactions by using their professional judgment and sophisticated sampling techniques. This is what auditing standards require. The auditor also conducts an evaluation of internal controls to determine if the company has controls in place to prevent the employees from committing fraud and/or making errors. Since the auditor cannot possibly look at every transaction, high-quality internal controls are important because they provide additional assurance that the company's financial statements are accurate. During this process, the auditor frequently identifies deficiencies in internal controls, particularly with a company this size, which could have an excellent system of internal controls but still end up with hundreds of small ways that fraud could be committed. Most of the time, these deficiencies are deemed to be immaterial, in the sense that they will not likely lead to large discrepancies in the financial statement figures. These deficiencies are privately disclosed to the company so that they can improve internal controls, and many times the company is able to resolve the issue before it becomes a problem. However, unless the auditor believes that an unresolved deficiency could lead to a large error in the financial statements, audit standards do not require that auditors modify their opinions about the company's financial statements and internal controls, and they are not required to disclose anything about the deficiencies to the public. The plaintiff is arguing that if the auditor had performed procedures correctly, they would have known that there was an increased risk of error and fraud in the company and would have modified their opinion accordingly. Unfortunately, the decisions made by auditors are not always black and white. It is well known in the professional community that the audit of internal controls is a difficult process that requires auditors to rely heavily on their professional judgment and instincts in certain situations. At times, there isn't solid evidence that the auditor can collect to support their judgments. In this particular situation, during their audit of the 2007 financial statements and internal controls of Clovatec Inc., ABC CPA firm discovered and documented 334 internal control deficiencies in various areas in the company, an average amount for a company of this size. All of these deficiencies were either corrected by Clovatec Inc. or the auditor decided that the deficiency was not likely to expose the company to large errors in the financial statements. One of these 334 deficiencies was in the internal controls established by top-level management. This deficiency was identified when the auditor performed interviews with a sample of sales representatives from 3 different offices to gain an understanding of the general attitude of upper-level management. Only one sales representative of the employees interviewed indicated that management was overly focused on meeting sales projections and would not care if the revenue figures were inflated as long as projections were met. ABC CPA firm immediately identified this as a significant deficiency in internal controls and documented the findings in their work papers. To see whether the deficiency could be a larger issue, the auditor expanded their sample to interview an additional sample of employees and found no other indication that the employees felt pressured to inflate their revenue figures. In their routine procedures to test for the accuracy of revenue figures, the auditor also examined a sample of sales transactions and found them all to be legitimate sales. Based on this evidence, ABC CPA firm decided that this deficiency in the internal controls established by top management would not be likely to cause a material misstatement of the financial statements. The auditor relied on this evidence and their own professional judgment in this case to formulate their opinions about the deficiency. Although the plaintiff argues that the auditor did not perform enough procedures to properly assess the impact of this internal control issue, we argue that the auditor operated within audit standards and documented their findings accordingly. They concluded, based on the evidence at the time, that there was not a material weakness in internal controls. This means that they do not believe that the deficiency would be bad enough to potentially lead to a significant error in the financial statement figures. Based on this conclusion and audit standards, the auditor had no responsibility to disclose any information on the internal control deficiency at all. Therefore, the auditor's failure to disclose the deficiency publicly is completely irrelevant to this case, as auditors are not required by audit standards to disclose internal control deficiencies if they are not deemed material weaknesses. Any additional disclosure of internal control deficiencies is considered entirely optional. To put this into perspective, this was the only deficiency out of 334 where the auditor's judgment turned out to be inaccurate in hindsight. If we think in broader terms about how many deficiencies an audit firm will identify each year across all of their clients in the U.S., this is one deficiency out of thousands. No person should ever be held to such a standard of perfection, especially when they clearly perform their job within the standard guidelines of the profession. Negligent misrepresentation can be established only when an auditor fails to exercise the usual judgment, care, skill, and diligence employed by other certified public accountants, CPAs, in the community. The auditor being sued in this case clearly performed the appropriate audit procedures to evaluate internal controls. The auditor was not required by auditing standards to say anything at all about the deficiency within the report. It is the defense's position that if an auditor complies with auditing standards, he has not been negligent. Has the plaintiff proven that this is a case of negligent misrepresentation on the part of the auditor? Absolutely not.